All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Innovation Alchemy. My name is Adam Castle, the Director of Venture Services and Partnerships at WEtech Alliance, and this is the podcast that explores the mess, the magic, and the mastery of innovation and those bold enough and brave enough to build it. Now, today, I've got a very special guest. We have Ashleen Douglas here joining me. Ashleen is the chair of the WEtech Alliance Board, but that is not why you're here today to talk to me. I want you to share today your experience in your career in operations, the layer of growing tech companies, and as they progress through that like startup early grind to an official company running and moving into the market, and what that kind of means. So you're the person that CEOs and their executive teams turn to in those times when you're moving from being the person doing the work to the people that are planning how that work gets done. And there's just so much that I'm interested in unpacking with you today. So thank you so much for being here.
I'm really excited to be here.
Before we get started, I want you to start with a moment, specifically somewhere in your career where you've watched a founder move from that role of like direct sole contributor to the person that needs to be on the outside looking in, making sure that the infrastructure is there so that what they've built can continue to grow.
Yeah, it's a really incredible inflection point. And I think this happens with, I know this happens with every founder. And I'm going to pick on technical co-founders a little bit more.
Yeah.
Just because I feel like it's...
I think they'd find it fair too.
Yeah, it's a little bit more of a difficult transition when you've built the product inside and out. But I have joined companies when they're going through this transition. And in particular, I think one of the most difficult pieces of it is just generally letting go of that control and that insight. And you go from, conceptualizing this idea.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden there's other people who think this idea is incredible. And then you maybe get some funding behind it and you're like, wow, people think I can do this. I know I can do this. And you get a small team going and it's a little family and you're so excited about it. But then all of a sudden it becomes a business and you're further away from the thing that you were inspired to build, the things that you were motivated to build. And I've seen this a couple of times, and it's really difficult going from sort of that team feeling that I just spoke about of like a really small team where everyone knows each other and everyone knows everything about what's happening in the company and what's not happening in the company, to all of a sudden some things are a little bit more private.
Right.
So there's a struggle with communication. There can be faults that show up there, fault lines, I should say.
Yeah.
And I've seen founders really struggle with that. I've seen founders really struggle with the idea of maybe not always being everyone's friend.
Yeah. For sure.
Being away from the product and not having that full control. And it's from the best perspective because they were the ones who initiated it from its infancy. So I, of course, don't want to get into anyone in particular story, but I think this is definitely a trend that happens. And I think, what that letting go looks different for each founder.
Of course.
Yeah.
I'm seeing a lot of parallels between this and being a dad. And I'm sure you see a lot as being a mom as well, which is, these early stages where you're with them constantly. And so that feedback loop is very close.
Yes.
There's no space in between. And then slowly they start to become a representation of what you've poured in. And you're not in the room when they're having conversations or interacting with the world or going off to do their own things. And so you have to trust that what you've instilled is enough to carry your ethos, your message, your values kind of forward. And I see that a lot in founders as things start to scale up. We don't have a lot of examples of that in this region. I find most of our teams stay fairly small. And I think there's a lot of geographic reasons for that.
Yeah.
But even in founders that we work with in the GTA area or at Waterloo, where teams have gotten to be over 100, it's interesting to see kind of how that feedback loop or lack thereof really changes the dynamics. But I'm curious, as you've experienced a founder and that founding team get to that point where, okay, things need to shift, communication needs to change because what worked isn't necessarily what's going to work moving forward. What is like that two divergent pathways that they can take between, making things better at that moment or making things worse?
I mean, I think one of the ways to kind of talk about that and demonstrate it is the risk if you don't make change. So change is inevitable. Your company will never be the same. And in fact, I would say in startups, it almost feels like a new company every 6 months.
Yep.
You have to be reinventing how things work, how things grow, how things scale. And the risks that happen when you don't do that, especially if you're going through, let's say, hyperscaling or hypergrowth, is you're going to look at employee retention issues. Employee satisfaction issues. You're going to be looking at output from your team being differently, trust breaking down, back channels opening up where, if people aren't getting information, they will try and find information no matter what. So either you control that narrative or you allow kind of that expansive black hole to kind of open up. I mean, the risk is, essentially the success of your team and in turn your product. If you're not paying attention, if you aren't adapting at the same rate that your company is adapting to your product and your market.
There's a lot of that I want to unpack in terms of like the theories around growth and really the systems that we build within it in order to sustain growth. But before we move to that point, would you mind officially introducing yourself and telling our listeners a little bit about you and your background?
Sure. So I'm what I would call a generalist. Operators are generalists. I think a lot of people wonder what operations even means. And I don't think you could probably get one specific definition because it looks different at every company. But I describe myself as a generalist. I like to solve problems and I like to solve operational problems. And what that means is, actually, let me paint it in a different light. I went to school here locally. I went to St. Clair College, was a graduate. And a professor at the time told me, there's this kind of translator role that exists in businesses. You can talk to tech teams and you can talk to business teams. And I think that you should stay in that niche. I think you do really well. And at the time I was becoming a web developer and I said, I'm going to code every day for the rest of my life. And the first real job that I had was at a marketing agency that had been in existence for about 15 years. And marketing agencies are very waterfall. You do thing A, then thing B, then thing C, and it produces thing D. Software engineering doesn't work that way. There's a lot of iteration. There's a lot of trying. There's a lot of different loops. There's feedback. You're building something from nothing. So we're not going to get it right the first time. And so I ended up spending a lot of time trying to figure out how these two worlds kind of come together. How do we work together? How do we play nice? And how do we do it in a way that's actually going to positively impact the business? And really, those are the types of problems that operators solve. So there's lots of different titles that I've had and other operators have had. I've been in project and program management. I've been a chief of staff to a CEO who transitioned to CTO. He's a co-founder. Been in an operator / operations manager role with VPs of engineering. And one of the other problems that I hopped in to solve was, leading a people team, because that's where the problem needed to be solved was, figuring out what HR kind of looked like for that company. So that was a very long-winded way to say I like to jump in, solve problems, and that's really what an operator does. They kind of set up the systems to allow people to scale and pass it off. So we're often enabling others.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So let's go back to that opener, because I think there's a lot there that we can use to kind of build the rest of this conversation around. So you had mentioned, as things scale, what gets inherently harder is ensuring that all of the parts in a business still communicate and work cohesively together. I've spent the last 2.5 years being exhaustively obsessed with this idea that startups are a form of system, and they're not that different from the ones that we see in the biological world. And I think a lot about a startup acting the same way that plants and animals do, in terms of, if you look at a tree when they're quite small, they don't need to work as hard to get all of the nutrients to their branches so that everything has a leaf on it, essentially. And in a startup, it's roughly the same way. Everyone can fill into the cracks and play all the roles that need to be played fairly readily, because they're so easy to be nimble. But as things grow and you need more energy in order to reach the tallest branches and the furthest tips of the tree, you require a lot more nutrients to go a lot further. And I think in a startup, what you're looking at from a nutrients perspective is obviously the information, the communication, the leadership, right? How do you know which way you're growing? And so there has to be a mix of, I think, autonomy to know that the branches know to grow towards the sun, but also I think a level of cohesion to say that, like, if we grow in every which direction, we won't have enough energy to support the core of us, the trunk. And so as we're looking at a kind of a startup in that way, describe to me that role of operations then, because I think it's anomalous. It's this idea that, like, you are the person that comes in to make sure things work. But there are so many different things that have to work in order for that business to grow, the tree to continue to reach towards the sun. So start us there and kind of describe to me what that role of operations really means on a day-to-day basis.
That makes sense. The one thing that I'll say, and I don't mean this to be a non-answer, is that there is no hard and fast rule.
Yeah.
I personally, when I join a new organization, is generally I go on a listening tour.
Okay.
Where I go and I meet people. So whether definitely the stakeholders, definitely the executive leadership team, but equally, like some of the managers, some of the people who are making decisions, some of the glue people that everyone seems to, sing praises about. Just try and understand what the landscape is, and build relationships and build trust before I try and fix anything. Yep. You have to listen in order to move forward. It's like taking a step back before you move forward. And so as an operator, that's really key, is first listening. And then there's lots of things that you can do to kind of nourish. And so, for example, let's say there's an information gap and people are saying, well, I thought we were going for funding, but I don't know, I haven't heard anything. Like, it's been a few months and I haven't heard anything. Or I used to hear updates from the CEO because he was in the product all the time, and he'd give like these weekly updates of what's going on in the product, but I don't really touch the product, and now I don't know what's going on, and I feel uneasy about that. Are we making our goals? Are we reaching our milestones? So it's like, okay, here's a gap in information. Yep. Is it, do we need to be sending out, does the CEO need to be sending out a weekly Slack update in a general channel so that everyone feels connected and it's coming directly from them, and the team really values that insight coming directly from the CEO, so they feel like they have that connection? Or is it building, an all hands, whether that's weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, getting information out? Is it, does it need to be primarily the CEO? Because people are, again, in that transition when it goes from very small to larger, people are kind of feel a little bit starved from that line of direct openness and communication with the CEO, because there is a separation that comes at some point.
Of course.
And people feel a little bit put off by that. They're a little bit shy, maybe even take it personally sometimes. So do we need to hear from the CEO most of the time in those all hands? Do we need to start delegating that out because the CEO now has a trusted board of
Right.
a trusted team of executives or senior leaders that can bring that. Are people curious what's going on in engineering because they don't understand engineering? They're in the marketing world and they're putting all this out, but they don't actually know what's kind of in the works. They know what they're told to put out.
Right.
They know what is done, but they don't necessarily what's up and coming. What are they struggling with? What is product thinking about? And so it's about creating those opportunities for collaboration and collision. You know, I know WEtech uses that concept a lot, collision points.
Yeah.
And so it's understanding what the layout, the landscape of that particular company is, understanding the fabric of that culture, and, you know, and making tweaks and putting in guardrails along the way.
Okay.
So I know we've talked a little bit about scaling and process and what that can look like, but my personal belief is that the best operators, especially when you're going like through Series A to maybe C, is putting in guardrails and not necessarily rules and regulations.
I like that. It's a sandbox, not
Absolutely.
necessarily a space.
It's a new company every 6 months. So if you put in things that are too rigid, the team suffers, progress suffers, communication suffers.
Of course, What I think is really interesting and a little bit telling. So recently I had a podcast, 2 podcasts back, if the listeners are fans, with someone working on pharmacogenomics. This idea that our body reacts very differently. And so in order to figure out how your body is going to react at a certain medication or a certain intervention, you have to really understand what the DNA says first.
Yes.
And it sounds as though your role of operator is coming into an organization, understanding what that underlying DNA is saying, and then applying where those interventions make sense. So not all companies are going to need the same ones.
Yes.
Some are going to be happy taking, you know, that all teams meeting from the executive team. Some are going to require it directly from the CEO's mouth because that's what they're most comfortable with. And so your job is to really go in and play a detective almost to understand what's the makeup of this organization and how can I apply these interventions to make it stronger.
Absolutely. Operators are generally, there's usually someone in every company who's kind of a glue person.
Yeah.
Who, they're not necessarily responsible for, a number of assets or a specific output all the time. Maybe at times they are, but they are someone who understands the dynamic of that company, the dynamic of the culture, and actively works to better it and grow it.
Yeah. That's awesome. What a cool role.
Yeah, it's really great. It's
never
the same.
And get into it at this point. Yeah.
Come with me. Come with me.
Sorry, Yvonne. I'm curious, you're part of an organization called Ask a Chief of Staff. And so most of our clients at WEtech Alliance would never even dream of a chief of staff, let alone being able to ask them something.
Yeah.
And so this podcast goes out to all of our clients. And the idea is to provide really tactical items for them that they can take away from these conversations and use to kind of build. So I'm curious, tell us a little bit about that organization and what it kind of stands for. Absolutely.
So Ask a Chief of Staff was started by somebody named Clara Ma, who saw that, and I don't know all the details, but essentially saw that there was this emerging role where you're supporting an executive and you're this side-by-side operator, you're this partner, but there wasn't necessarily a place for those partners to connect.
Okay.
Operators, as much as I love the role, it can be a very lonely role in the sense that you hold a lot. You can take a lot of the emotional weight of what the team is feeling, the pressure that the executive team is feeling, and you're kind of the person that synthesizes this. And you're not necessarily equipped with a full team.
Right.
So a lot of the times you're a team of one, maybe two.
A one-person middle ground between all of the layers of an organization is not an easy place to navigate from.
Essentially. And so Ask a Chief of Staff was one of those communities that kind of popped up to allow other operators and other chiefs of staff, titled or not, to come together, sanity check, share tips, share ideas, and connect with each other.
Really cool. So if you want to plug into that, is there a website? Is it a LinkedIn group? What's the best way to get in touch?
So the best thing to do, I believe it's askachiefofstaff.com.
Okay.
And you can apply to join the Slack community, which is an absolute wealth of resources and information.
We'll have the link to this inside the toolbox after the episode for anyone that's interested. So just kind of look below. You're dealing with, I imagine, a lot of people that have that same mentality as you in this role through that organization. What's something that kind of surfaces there that doesn't necessarily make its way into a lot of these founder podcasts or maybe some of those resource provider toolkits that founders can find online for free?
I think the biggest one for the chiefs of staff or the operators themselves is that no one necessarily knows the answer.
Yep.
And I worked with an executive who painted this picture for me really early, is that everyone at a startup is making their best guess, best educated guess.
Yeah.
Especially for the things that nobody's done before, which is 99% of the time what startups are doing. They're innovating.
The blueprint is not there. Yeah.
Exactly. It's not there. Nobody's going to tell you this is the right decision or this is the wrong decision. And so inside of these communities, it's really just people saying, have you seen this before?
Okay.
Have you dealt with this before? This seems new to me. Has anyone else dealt with this system, this archetype of executive? And really it's just people coming together and sharing. So I think, back to your question, I think the biggest thing that comes out of that is that we're not alone. And although we are kind of doing things for the first time, there are lessons that you can garner from so many different things in so many unexpected places in order to, contribute to these messy and beautiful startups that we're all part of.
What a powerful kind of community of action or community
Absolutely.
of practice that kind of creates. And I would imagine too, as a founder, tapping into that would help me understand, how do I build a foundation that potentially avoids some of the pitfalls that folks like you were seeing at these later stages of growth, where things do get a lot messier and a lot more complicated as they kind of scale.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of founders generally do gravitate to, whether they have somebody called an operator, titled with an operator, or a chief of staff or VP of operate, whatever it is, they generally have somebody that can kind of that's their number two.
Yep.
That they go to, they talk through problems. And I think it wasn't, necessarily a question that you asked, but in terms of getting insight from folks like this, sometimes the easiest and the hardest thing is listening to that person that's beside you. Yeah. Because they're not there if they're good. They're not there to be an echo chamber for your thoughts. They're there to push back.
Right.
They're there to tell you when you're wrong. They're there to tell you when people are not comfortable with the decisions that are being made. So, as a founder, when you venture into this area of having your kind of number two, your operator that's inside the business, it's going to be hard to listen sometimes.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things where if you take a step back and you just take it for what it is, that it's not personal. They're trying to better you. They're trying to better the organization and in turn, growth. Then it becomes a little bit easier to grow.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah,
that's really interesting, and I think such a wealth of information and worth any founder that's listening to really pay attention to those words, because I think they've got weight to them. So you've been a part of businesses and companies, fast-moving companies,
yes,
at every stage in growth, from 10 people to 50 people to 100. What is the difference between those stages? What does it feel like inside an organization at those different moments? Yeah,
I mean, so I'll start with one thing that is the same, which is not what you asked. But it's that there's a certain amount of controlled chaos at every stage. And it will feel chaotic at just about every stage. So that is normal. That is part of everything. But I would say, when you're starting off small, it can feel like, you're a little bit resource strapped. You can feel like if I just had a little bit more funding, if I just had one more employee, if I just had this, and you're trying to, kind of push to these new levels. But a really small, close-knit team is kind of the time that a lot of founders look back on. And it's like, this is my favorite time. It's going to feel the most chaotic, but it's fast moving. It's exciting. It's stressful. It's exhilarating. You want to pull your hair out all at the same time. But it kind of feels a little bit more like a friend group, or I don't like using the term family necessarily for business, but it does kind of have that more of a really close-knit feel.
Forged in iron type.
Exactly. That you're bonded.
Yes. We have a growth coach that grew a business over $90 million in raise, and he was coaching one of our teams for the Scale Up Accelerator, and he lived in Toronto at the time. He would come down just to sit with the team and pull up one of the broken chairs, wheel it over to the pod of people working. And they're like, dude, you're like a multi-millionaire. What are you doing? You don't have to be here with us. And that was exactly what he said, was like, I miss this period so much, and you never get it back unless you start a new company. And even then, there's still something magical about that first like grindy 100%. Ride that you're on as a startup founder. And so, he would like sit with them in that chaos and be like, this just feels like home. And I think that's in the DNA of every good founder that I've met, of like, that's the chaos that I think they're drawn to. Because things get very complicated as it scales.
And I think that, that's exactly what a lot of founders start struggling with, and why they end up needing, an operator of sorts, by their side as they start scaling. So as they move past that, 25 person mark, it starts, communication starts getting a little bit more difficult. Keeping everyone apprised becomes a little bit more difficult. Before, I mean, you can all fit in a room, a pretty small room, and just be like, this is what's going on. And then when funding gets involved, and especially if there's VC, not everyone is going to be apprised of everything. And so you start having to like make that shift, which is a really difficult thing. But it's still at like 25, you're still moving at the speed of light. They're still very exciting, but you start seeing a little bit more of the business side taking priority. Definitely after, up to 50, CEOs are generally they become recruiters for the company. And I think that's one of the things that they don't necessarily expect. Then once you get around 50, you start becoming a company, right? You stop going from like kind of this innovation lab sort of vibe to you have to be a company. And you have audits that you have to do. And you have to start making paper trails, and you have to start putting in policies to not only enable your team, but because you are responsible for the funding that has come in. And you have to, people need to know that it's been used well and responsibly. And so it becomes a little bit different. It becomes a little bit more of a company. Sometimes, and this is totally okay, and it's totally normal, sometimes the people who really enjoy that kind of pre-seed Series A sort of chaotic grind, as soon as we get to like Series B, Series C, they start moving to another role or another company, looking for that kind of adrenaline chasing.
The high of it.
And that's okay. I think this is one thing that a lot of founders kind of struggle with, is that the people who kind of bring you to point A will not always be the people who will bring you to point B. And that's okay. But it can feel personal. It can feel hard because you went through that kind of family stage together, and all of a sudden they're moving on. But again, it's a different phase, and it's equally exciting. There's equally a lot of change. There's equally a lot of trajectory, but it just looks different, and the scale of that is a little bit different. And so, very small, chaotic, great, exciting. And then as you start getting over 50 folks, it becomes a little bit more like a traditional company. And the role of the founder definitely changes. I think, every time you double your employee numbers, the role of the CEO definitely changes.
Do you see CEOs and the founding teams really, is there a point within that journey where they really start to get most uncomfortable, or does it change with, the DNA of the makeup of the team?
I think it changes with the DNA of the founder themselves. I think it also depends on what kind of founder they were. So I'm going to pick on technical founders again. Technical founders love to stay close to the product, right? Which is normal, which is natural. And all of a sudden, they become the decision maker for everything.
Right.
And it's decision maker on whether to hire or let somebody go, whether it is to go with this VC or that VC, whether it is to travel to conferences and schmooze with people, and all of a sudden they're kind of, away from the product. So, I've seen that happen a number of times, and that's, I think, a really difficult transition. But I've also seen other folks who kind of revel in the strategy. All of a sudden, they didn't know that they liked strategy. Yeah. They didn't know that they liked understanding, the dynamics of raising capital and all of those things. So it depends on the DNA of the founder, and it also depends on the DNA of the team that surrounds them and how comfortable they are with delegating and different things at different stages.
That's interesting. I know, not everyone is going to like the jump from checkers to chess, but some end up finding like there's more value in that. I've even found too, like I'm very much the individual contributor archetype. I really love the problem solving that comes with managing people and making sure that, you're out of the way enough to enable them to do their best work, but also in the way enough to make sure that the vision still gets translated over. So
totally.
It's not an easy act to balance, but one that like feels really good when you're doing it well and getting it right, which is not often, but it happens.
I mean, it's good in the sense of, I'm going to put it in a way that somebody way smarter than me put it. There's somebody named Molly Graham who is like operator extraordinaire. She was involved with Quip before it was acquired by Slack, involved in Facebook early days. And she has something called the Glue Club. And a very famous article that she wrote is called Letting Go of Your Legos. And if I work with anyone in tech and they haven't read this article, I share it with them immediately. And it's about, you're going to build this tower of Legos. You're going to be given these Legos. You're going to build, and you're going to build this cool, interesting thing that you're super proud of. And then all of a sudden, it doesn't need to be built anymore. The Legos are done, but there's this whole other pile over here. So what do you do with the Legos that you have? Giving away your Legos is the point.
Right.
It's building things up enough, especially as an operator, where you can hand it to somebody else and go to the next fire. And for CEOs, and founders in general, it's the same thing. Your role is not going to be the same. You're not always going to be able to focus on product for forevermore. You're not forever going to only be able to focus on strategy forevermore. You have to be willing to kind of build your Legos and then also give them away when the time's right.
I love that. I just interviewed the co-founder of this podcast and we had asked ourselves, like, what do we want to see this as in the next 6 years when we sit down again for the next milestone kind of episode at 80? And my answer was like, I want us to be being interviewed by someone else on the other side of this mic. Like I want someone else to take that torch. And so it's no longer ours. It's something different and something new and fresh, but still has that same kind of value. And so I can definitely see the value in that. Is there a stage within that, the 10, 50, 100, where most companies start to stall out, or they hit like really major bottlenecks? And I guess my curiosity there is that about the CEO, about the people around them, or is that about something else entirely?
Yeah, I think, I feel like this is the way I've answered every question is it depends. I'd say generally around 50, I think is the hardest. It's really an inflection point when it comes to managing the business. Things become really real around that point. Especially in the States, there are compliance laws when it comes to people that come into play. So there's definitely, it's definitely a very specific threshold that is very difficult for a lot of folks. And equally I think you extended that to, the business as well and the people within the business. I do think that around that point is where, especially if people have been there since the beginning and they're not necessarily in the leadership aspect or the leadership team, they're not necessarily close to the founding team anymore.
Right.
There's some separation. That can, for a lot of people, be really demoralizing. It can feel hurtful or personal. And especially because you've had that kind of, if somebody's been there from the beginning or close to the beginning, they've been a part of that family time.
It all from day one.
And now there's this gap. So I do think that is one of the most difficult times, both for founders and for the team itself. But if you take the time to listen, to reevaluate, to self-reflect is a huge part of that. And be willing to be flexible or pivot where necessary. It's also the time where you can unlock like the next phase. So you have to be willing to put in that work.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit of a time where you've seen, and maybe generalized a little bit, but a founder that's done that really well? Like, what are those building blocks or Legos that they kind of had to give up? But what were some of the things that they kept as a foundation and made them stronger through that process?
That's a really good question. I think, there's one that I can think of that they did really, really well, in the sense that through the growth of the company, and they had a fairly quick rise, especially pre-COVID. It was all of a sudden business was booming, and then COVID came and business was astronomical.
1,000 years ago at this point.
And one of the things that I think the founding team and, the co-founder that I was working with did really well, and this, I actually joined just after COVID. So this is me kind of getting the tailwind of the effort that he's put in, was focusing on people first. Now, I know, people who are strictly in business are going to be like, what is she saying? We have to focus on the business. We're not necessarily here to make everyone happy, which is true, which is absolutely true. But equally, happy people have the best output. People who have autonomy, people who feel like, they're making an impact, people who feel like they're well compensated, people who feel like they're, there's enough of, kind of that benefit, whether that's health benefits or whether that's unlimited PTO or whether that's, whatever type of flexibility that particular cultural fabric is looking for. Paying attention and understanding that investing in these things is investing in your product. And I think this founder in particular did a really good job. He also had a really great team around him of senior leaders that he listened to through that transition. And he really relied on and delegated very well at that stage. And, I've seen that company grow, and I've seen that company contract because of the times. It's difficult. But every single alumni that worked at that company, no matter how they exited, had the best things to say about their experience. And it's been years. So they made a huge impact, and they listened.
That's awesome. I would say, like, as a background of someone who started my career in social work, I try and bring that people lens into everything in this space. A lot of what we do tends to be in economic development, just in general, is about the numbers. It's about the jobs or the dollars invested or the profits created. But at the end of the day, what's powering all of those things are the people. And to your point, you can't make everyone happy, and not everyone is going to be on that bus with you, but the people that are can be taken care of and provided the autonomy they need to feel like they're also, just as responsible for helping the direction of where things are going.
Absolutely.
Would you say then as a founder is growing or as a business is growing and that founder is juggling so many things in the air at once, the people aspect of it is the one thing or maybe the few things that cannot be dropped.
It can't be dropped. And the thing is, it doesn't necessarily need to be upheld by the founder. It just has to be upheld. So that's having a responsible team, people that you trust, people that you know are going to, bring things to you when it's appropriate and it's, a decision that only they can be made or that only they can make. But it's making sure that the team is well taken care of and understanding what success looks like. So one of the best managers I ever had, one of the first questions he asked me was, what does success look like for me after the company that we're currently at? Like I just got hired.
Yeah.
And he's like, okay, but what does success look like in 10 years when you're no longer here? I was like, why are you asking me about this? I just got hired. I'm not trying to leave. And then he asked what success looks like for me in a role. Because every person is different. Some people really want those rules of engagement.
Yeah.
Where I'm going to stay inside these lines and I know I'm going to be successful if I stay inside these lines and I'm going to do step 1, 2, 3, 4 in that exact order. And that's my formula for success. Other people feel like they're in a chokehold when you tell them that. I'm one of those people where if you tell me I have to stay within these lines, I'm going to do it for a little while. And then I'm going to start getting curious because I can't help it.
Of course.
I like having broader impact. I like seeing problems and just going ahead and fixing them. And so for me, success would not be within that. So I think for founders, understanding their team in general and having their managers, because they're going to manage managers of managers. And so understanding that it's important for their team, their first team, their leadership team, to be pushing that forward as a culture. Like, what does success look like for you? What does growth look like for you? And having that data allows you at a strategic level to say, hey, as a whole, our teams are really focused. They really want benefits, or they really want retirement savings matching program, or they just need some flexibility. So it allows the CEO to be able to make those strategic decisions to keep people happy. So, the more that the CEO or the founder can kind of create that culture at the top, the more successful the teams can be throughout all levels of the organization.
I love that idea of identifying what individual vision means and where that goes. One of the best books on management I've ever read is Fifth Discipline by Peter Senge. And it talks a lot about, you can sell a vision from an organizational perspective, but no one's going to buy into it unless you're listening to what their vision is personally. It doesn't have to be like, you want to own a small farm in the Poconos. It's about what does success look like specifically within the role, and not necessarily, how it ties into other things. So that's really cool. I want to spend a bit of time on AI because who isn't right now? But it is really changing things rapidly. And I know that you've experienced it and you've worked with it on the teams that you've been a part of, and you've seen it kind of make an impact. And I'm curious, what have you seen as like the biggest impact right now for how AI is being deployed inside these like high growth companies?
Yeah, I would say that it's actually changing for non-technical folks at a greater, I don't want to say a greater rate, maybe a greater rate than anyone would have expected. The one role that I talk about all the time is the product manager role, where literally 6 months ago, they would be creating functional requirements. They'd be creating a product requirements document. They'd be doing a roadshow with that, making sure everything, all the, T's were crossed, I's were dotted, working with a designer to get a mock-up, whether that's a wireframe or anything. And there's kind of like this process. And yes, there's iteration. But I mean, there's this whole process that was owned. And I think now, and they've actually put out some of the requirements for product managers at Google, for example. They need to see your GitHub account. because product managers are going from, hey, let's have a conversation, to working between Cloud Cowork and Cloud Code and building a prototype that we can put in front of the engineers in a very short turnaround time.
Right.
So I think non-technical roles are seeing so much more of an impact than anyone I think would have imagined, and at such a greater rate or quicker rate than anyone would have imagined.
We used to measure a company based on headcount, right? We talked about it earlier.
Yeah.
It's the 10, the 50, the 100 mark.
Yeah.
But AI has really rewritten that. A team of 10 can now do what a team of 25 did yesterday. Do you see it breaking that measurement scale for us of like company maturity or company progress based on headcount solely?
Absolutely.
What do you see replacing that measurement now?
It's I don't know that there's necessarily a measurement, and I'm sure, as people, watch this podcast, they're gonna be like, wait, there is a measurement because people are working with it. But I would say that it is more about outcomes than ever. What information can we surface and garner in a way that is faster and more accurate than we have before? So, engineers there's DORA metrics and things that a lot of engineers are measured on. But now it's almost like some of those are going out the window, because you could create thousands of lines of code in a week.
Yeah.
And everyone's like, great. And I think at the beginning there was almost an apprehension of like, yeah, but how much did AI write of that?
Yeah.
People don't care anymore. They're like, great, AI wrote most of it.
Yeah.
Great, we understand. Did you ask Claude, or did you ask AI, whatever platform you're using?
Yeah.
Did you ask it to document the changes?
Yeah.
Did you ask it to put in a README? Okay, you did? Cool. Let's move on to the next thing. And so I don't know that there's a specific metric that we're looking at in terms of like, what does success look like for a company, or like growth? I can't necessarily say that, but I think we probably will have things very quickly.
Yeah.
Who knows? By the time this is published, there could be something that has come out and said, "Hey, this is a really great way that we think we can measure. We can measure growth and trajectory anymore." That was a really long answer to say I don't know, and I think we're figuring it out.
No, I like that, and I think that's the only answer right now.
Yeah.
I also think it's incredible how quick that adoption rate has become, between there's a stigma around something to this is now the normal way to do it, and like, why wouldn't you? Never, I think in my tenure have I ever seen a technology that has broken that sound barrier so quickly of stigma to great. Of course you're going to use it. And so that's pretty wild. Do you see founders over-rotating on some AI applications? And is there any, do you think, kind of like pitfalls potentially?
I think there's a pitfall when founders are using this for things that culturally impact their companies.
Okay.
So I think, for at the trade-off of moving fast, there's a little bit of a leniency to move towards like, oh, we need to create a policy, just put it in Claude.
Yeah.
Like Claude will create the policy and just review it. And if it's good, like run it past HR and then we can post it. Where a lot of these things still have very human impacts when you're thinking about how your company actually functions, what you value. And so I think there might be an over tendency to like lean on it for the administrative things that, people, they're not as exciting.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that could potentially be a pitfall where we're not necessarily doing a full review. We're not doing a human check.
Yeah.
We're saying we needed policy and we built a policy and now it's posted and then we'll just iterate on it.
Yeah.
Great. But like, let's also take 10 minutes to talk about it.
Yeah.
And so I think that's one area that could be a little bit dangerous in terms of like impacting your company culture.
Yeah. I would echo that. I think AI still doesn't have a good understanding of like reaction from a human perspective and impact. And that's been one of the biggest things that I've learned in my career is when you're working as a part of a team, if you take something on and you don't realize the impact that that has on work or on, creativity or on autonomy of other people, it can have some really adverse reactions. And
Agreed.
even as I've been playing around with AI to look at things, sometimes, the suggestions that it gives me feels very void of an understanding of like how a real human would react to something, which makes sense.
Agreed.
It's using, a
It does.
database of human writing, but not a human emotional reaction to it.
Agreed. Even dusting up my own resume. We always want to put metrics in resume, and this is what I did. This is what I've, this is the impact that I had. But as an operator, you're dealing with sensitive information.
Right.
So one of the suggestions was outing, the churn risk that we had at one company. Absolutely not. I'm not going to put that on a resume. That's dangerous. Or, coached executive through this particular situation, and it's like, well, no, like I wouldn't out my executive that way either.
Yeah.
And so, is it technically a great metric? Yes, that's true, but it's not. It's not something that is human.
Yeah. We look 24 months past this point, and this technology is moving at such a breakneck speed. Mm-hmm. What do you see that role of operator being in a fully AI augmented company?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think the role is going through a lot of change right now. I think that an operator inside of a company that is, putting AI first is both business systems and still being that like bridge, that human bridge. I think there is going to be more of a technical aspect to the role. Traditionally, a lot of operators, I'm a little bit of a atypical operator coming from an engineering background or a development background, I should say. Whereas a lot of operators come from finance, from marketing, from business proper, MBAs, those sort of things. So I do think that there's a shift to folks who can get these systems to connect and output credible insights that actually impact the business. And equally, but I do think at the same time, there is still going to be a huge emphasis on being that human bridge builder. Yeah. Because we're going to be so focused on data, and data is going to be so accessible, and it's going to be so raw, and it's going to be, everyone's going to be able to access all of this stuff. You still need that human aspect to read what's not being said, to read in between the lines, to hear what's happening in the back channel conversations, and seeing how we need to move operationally to make sure that we're actually listening to people. So I think the human aspect is going to be a big piece of it, but equally, I think operators are going to be much more involved in like business systems and generating those insights that come from the data.
I think that makes sense. Can you dive a little bit more into what stays unautomated in this like new world that we're entering?
Unautomated. Oh boy. I think there is a big part of hiring that will still remain unautomated. And I think a lot of recruiters will probably say, no, we're using AI for everything. Yeah. And yes, we are using AI to, to sift through applications, to look for, the 5-star matches versus the 1-star matches. Right. But there is something about the way that you evaluate somebody just from sitting with them and talking with them. I don't think interviews will all of a sudden go away. Yeah. I think there's still a huge human aspect that is going to be in that part. And then I think outside of that, there's still going to be, I think there's actually going to be a lot more need for human connection. So we may, we can see that in the trends of a lot of people going back to the workspace. Yeah. I know there's people on either sides of those spectrums. I'm a remote first worker for the last, 6+ years, and very happy with it. But I think that need for human connection as everything just becomes so easy, so accessible. Yeah. And so, what that means in terms of automation or unautomating or not automating, I think we're still going to need those social times. We're still going to need to, as efficient as we're going to get, we're still going to need those times to kind of slow down, evaluate, and, really, again, just be those human bridge builders.
Yeah. I would echo that. I think we saw that through like the great COVID experiment, which was everyone, in our space anyways, goes to this work from home model, and you lose the culture, you lose the collision points. And there's so many little moments there where you miss. And last night I was at a business event in Kingsville. And so it was all small businesses. There's some tech companies there too that invited as clients, but they're all kind of having conversation around, what is this world that they're operating in right now? And a lot of them talked about that disconnection. And what I felt was in a place like Kingsville, Ontario, which if you're not familiar, it's 40,000 people. It is not large and it's not dense. If they're feeling a disconnect, and they've felt it persistently since kind of the onset of the pandemic, and everyone kind of went into their own little boxes, and everything can be ordered online now, and all communication is done through screens. They were so hungry for those moments of connection and that opportunity to connect with someone that they didn't know, and just talk about life experience. And we see that with our founders too, with all these different events. And the most important thing that we consistently receive on our feedback forms is that opportunity to connect with others who are going through similar experiences. And so I think you're right. I think you can't automate that part out.
No.
And I think for anyone that's in, I would say, like a customer facing role, there's such a value in having a human touch to everything from an email to a phone call to a follow-up. Like all of those items I think are still really valuable as a human lens applied to them. Even if you're using Copilot to help you craft the response, making sure that there's enough of you in that response. Because I find, like, from a founder perspective, incredibly isolating role.
It is.
And it only gets, more increasing as the complexity kind of ages up. So we're at our final kind of segment for this podcast, and it's a lightning round. First, the first thing you would say to a founder when they raise their first bit of angel capital, and the first thing you say to a founder once they raise their Series A.
Oh, goodness. Plan.
Okay.
Plan. Stick to the plan.
Yeah.
I think sometimes when you see all that money, it just, especially if you're talking about, millions, because Series A can come through in millions. And it seems like every door is unlocked. And sometimes the goal is to just hire, or buy all the systems and all those things. Sometimes you have to go slow to move fast. And so don't let the shiny coins kind of distract you from the fact that there's a very specific plan and there's a very specific reason you raised. Stick to your plan, stick to your goals. If you need to pivot, that's fine. But take the time to actually, pay attention to that.
One of the clients that we work with raised $1 million in the last couple of years. And the first thing that they did after raising, and that was investor dollars, was pretend they didn't raise it at all and go and look for ways to leverage that money and act as though they're still bootstrapping, because that was what created kind of this drive to them. Would that be the same advice for both the angel company and the Series A founder?
Yes.
Amazing.
Yes.
So it's pretty consistent then.
It's pretty consistent. I think I've even seen this, at Series C. Multi-million dollars, and all of a sudden all the budgets go out the window. But you still have very real fixed runway.
Of course.
And the more you spend, the shorter that runway gets. The quicker you have to go back into those funding rounds. And as you get into the later funding, you're not going to be funding based off of ideas or based off of, investors seeing potential in the CEO. It's going to be based on results.
Right.
And so the quicker you move towards that, the more difficult it is to raise. So runway is very real. It's very real.
And especially in this climate, I think it's a lot shorter than most people would have imagined 6 months ago or a year ago as well. We're seeing that, like, a lot of rude awakenings to that as well, unfortunately. one question you wish every board would ask their CEO?
More of an open-ended question, what is the one thing you're struggling with and how can we help? Not all boards are set up to do that.
Yeah.
And not all board members are willing to extend themselves or extend their network or extend their own expertise. But to your point, being a founder, being a CEO is very lonely.
Yeah.
It's very difficult. And the grind never stops. No one's going to work harder than you.
Yep.
They know that.
Mm-hmm.
Most of them have been in the similar position that you have. And that's why they invest.
Right.
So I think, even if you're frustrated with decisions that have been made or why things have been made or things like that, the CEO knows.
Right.
The founder knows what went wrong.
Yeah, yeah.
And so asking them, what are you struggling with the most and where can we help, can sometimes just be that breath of fresh air that like, hey, you're with me, you see me. And maybe 9 times out of 10, they say, no, I'm good.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's, I think there's a lot that can be said for, again, how lonely it is and letting them know that we got your back.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's part of the hygiene that we've installed at WEtech too, like as advisors, because we tend to be like, we're that first board, right? We're the first coach. And so when you're working with a founder that's just themselves trying to create something or, looking at how little runway they have, asking like, what is it that I could do today that would make your life just a little bit easier, knowing that I can't fix everything, but maybe I can help make a connection or build something for you that moves you in the right direction. I think that's really important. So final question.
Okay.
One operating habit that you wish every founder knew at the earliest stages of development that saves headaches moving forward?
Listen early and often. And I know I've said something along that lines a million times in this last little bit. It becomes more painful the more you ignore a thing.
Yeah.
If you hear grumblings of something, pay attention.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily always have to act immediately, but be aware. Because when things eventually get to a point where things are broken, it's so much harder to regain that trust.
Yeah.
And that's really what it is. Yeah. It's about building that psychological safety, building that trust dynamic within the company and within the cultural fabric of the company.
Yeah, yeah.
So much of it is so much of it is the CEO sets it.
Yep.
Culture comes from the top.
Of course.
And so if you are breaking that trust or if you've allowed that trust to be broken, it's really hard to get it back.
Yeah.
So listen early, listen often. You don't have to, jump as soon as somebody says that something is not looking great.
Yeah.
But you can internalize it and say, I'm noting that. If I hear that again, or if things continue along this path, maybe this is what we'll do. So just pay attention, listen early and often.
I think that's great advice. Yeah. We talk a lot about, technical debt with our founders, especially in this age of AI. There's a lot of technical debt that comes from moving super fast and getting an MVP out the door. And then all of a sudden there's no security layer. There's no, there's all these things that are missing. But I think as you grow a company, there's also such a thing as like that people debt, right? That personal debt or that empathy debt that can be created where we're driving something forward, not paying attention to who's getting us there necessarily. Yes. And if you let that erode too long, it becomes a point where you can't, undo those things.
Absolutely. If you can set the foundations early on what, you really want the culture to look like, and you consistently are checking yourselves on that. Yeah, yeah. There was one company that I worked with who did a really good job at building culture. And one of the ways they did it very intentionally from the beginning, and everything that they did, they tied to a cultural value, because a lot of companies, they set these cultural values and they say it at the beginning of an all hands, or they put it on the website, and then the employees are like, yeah, but what are we doing about it? Yeah. Like, what does this mean?
How does this match
how does this actually show up for me? Or how do I show up for it?
Yeah.
And they did a really good job of like every kudos that was given out was tied to a company value.
I love that.
When you were shouting someone out on Slack, it was tied to a value.
Yeah.
When it came to performance reviews, it was tied to value. So you were actually evaluated on your performance based in the framing of cultural values. And again, all of that comes from the top. So if you can be intentional and listen to what's going on, listen early, and just kind of do those checks, do those internal checks.
Yeah.
Allow your leadership team the room to say when things are going awry or astray from those kind of things. Again, that trust piece it is just so important, whether you're a 5-person team or whether you're 150 or a 500-person team. Building that trust dynamic and that psychological safety, the earlier you do it, the better off everyone will be.
Well, this has been an awesome conversation. One I think our founders needed to hear, not one that they would typically tune into. And so I think this has been amazing. I'm so glad that we finally got to have it. Who cares how long we waited?
Yeah.
And I hope we have more in the future. And I'm really excited that obviously you still get to be a part of the WEtech journey and see where we're headed. But equally so, I'm excited to see where you're headed next too, because I know the sky's the limit. So
I appreciate you. I was very excited to be here. This was great. And I'll be back again anytime you invite me.
Amazing. Ashley, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Adam.
Awesome. So from Innovation Alchemy, we'll see you next time.